speaker today is one of the world's most famous pilots. Amelia Earhart is best known as the first woman and second person to fly solo across the Atlantic. Ms. Earhart set her first aviation record in 1922, flying to an altitude of 14,000 feet. 2 years ago, in 1935, she became the first person to solo over the Pacific with a flight from Hawaii to California. Amelia Earhart was a founding member and the first president of the 99s International Organization of Women Pilots. She has received Francis Cross of the Legion of Honor, the National Geographic Society's Special Gold Medal, and Distinguished Flying Cross. She has worked as a social worker, an aeronautical advisor, and a career counselor for Purdue University. She has published 2 books and will write a 3rd book after her upcoming flight around the world at the equator. Ms. Earhart has offered to take your questions following her talk. Well, and we're kind of waiting for her to show up. We don't know where she's at the moment. We hope she's not lost. We thought we heard an airplane land, and so we hope she's here safe and made the trip. There she is. Ladies and gentlemen, Amelia Earhart.
Well, I am Amelia Earhart, and it is April 14, 1937. And we are in liberal, so I am in the right place at the right time, am I not? A little late, and I do apologize. But I'm sure that you have been, you've been listening on the radio, reading in the newspapers what happened, so I might as well talk about that just up front. You know that I was attempting to fly around the world with the equator. I made it from California to Hawaii, and taking off from Luke Airfield, well, if you're going to take off from an island, you want to get a good start, right? And I had both engines going strong, taxiing down the runway, and just as I was ready to lift off, I felt as though a tire blew. The plane started going to the right. I attempted to correct it, and the ground moved to the left. The undercarriage, both propellers, and one wing of my beautiful silver flying laboratory were completely destroyed. And we had to take the Electra back to the Lockheed plant. And I will tell you, there is nothing that a plane hates worse than to be taken someplace by boat. But that's what happened to mine. And I am here in part to assure you that as soon as it is repaired, we're going to take off again. But this time, instead of going west, we'll go east. So we'll start from California, of course, because that's where the Lockheed plant is. And we'll go to Miami and Puerto Rico and South America and across the Atlantic and Africa. And my itinerary says that I should be in India today. Not back in my home state of Kansas, but if I'm not going to be flying around the world, this is a good place to be. Australia, New Guinea, refuel on Howland Island, and then Hawaii will be the last stop before we get back to the States instead of the first, and hopefully we'll have better luck with that. And in the meantime, well, no one pays me to fly airplanes. They pay me to talk about flying and write about flying. And I have a good many repairs to pay for, fresh fuel to put out, the mechanics that are waiting for me to appear so they can overhaul my engines. They've gone home, and I have to pay them before they'll come back out again. So I'm doing a lot of talking. And all of this is in part an apology, because, of course, usually when I give a talk, I I wear proper clothes, a dress, shoes, and you are getting not only aviator's garb, but rather grubby aviator's garb at that. And I wanted you to know that it's not out of any disrespect. It's just that my proper clothes and I haven't caught up with each other just yet. I've been a little nervous about coming back to Kansas anyway. I was here 2 years ago for the State Editors Association convention, and it was a great honor to be invited. It was being held in Atchison, which is where I spent most of my growing up time. I gave an address at Memorial Hall, and of course I wore proper clothes. There was a parade, and someone made a float for me that looked rather like an aeroplane. But afterwards, I heard that a young reporter asked Mr. William Allen White, the editor of the Emporia Gazette, you may be familiar with his writings. The young reporter asked Mr. White what he might like to say to me if he had the opportunity to meet me, and the sage of the plains replied that he would advise me to take a comb into the cockpit with me and use it before I came out. So I have been a little nervous about encountering audiences of well-coiffed individuals, each of them waving a comb at me, but that hasn't happened yet. And I said, if I'm not flying around the world, and Kansas is a fine place to be, because I am apparelled so informally, I thought what I would do is just answer the questions that I get asked the most. About how I got my start in aviation, and about my flights across the Atlantic. And then what I thought was, if you have any other things you would like to hear about, or any questions you have of me, then you can ask those. Is that fair enough? All right, splendid. Well, I like to say that my first flight was in Atchison. My younger sister and I, we lived there with our grandparents during the school year, and we spent holidays with our parents whose home was in Kansas City. And our grandparents had a lovely house right on the bank of the Missouri River. And from my bedroom window on the second story, we could look out and we could see that river as it flowed past, and we made up stories about where it might take us when we grew up. And we had the caves in the bank of the river to explore, and cousins to play with. And I had a wonderful childhood, I really did. But you young people, you are so fortunate to be growing up now in the 1930s, because you have both feet planted firmly in the 20th century, while I, having been born in 1897 and raised in large part by grandparents, grandmother could not help it. The 1800s, that was her time, and she was a proper Victorian lady, and she knew exactly what a girl should do and exactly what a boy should do, and those two things were generally very different. Now, one of my favorite things to do is to jump over the fence around our yard. I knew that my grandmother did not approve. So, on my way home from school, I would look around to make sure that no one was watching, and if I saw no one, I would gather up my skirts and I would run for that fence and I would vault over it. But inevitably, Grandma would appear on the porch. Amelia, Mary, how many times have I told you, dear? Girls go through gates. Only boys jump fences. say yes, ma'am, because of course I did respect her. But inside, I was thinking, I'm the only one who can jump this fence. None of the boys around here can jump this fence. One Christmas, Father gave Pidge and me a sled, a proper sled with metal runners. Now, grandmother, her idea of how a girl should ride a sled was that she should sit on it with her back very straight, her legs straight out in front of her, her skirt tucked around her legs, a blanket over her skirt, and someone should hold her on a level surface. Doesn't sound much fun, does it? Pidge, and my younger sister, her real name was Miriam, we always called her Pidge. Pidge and I, we liked to go fast, and the faster the better. So we went out to the kitchen, and we got an old candle, and we rubbed that candle wax onto those metal runners until they were good and slick. And then we carried that sled to the top of the highest hill in Atchison. And if any of you have been to Atchison, have you? It is hilly, is it not? 2nd Street. And I got to go first because I am older. And I put that sled under my arm and I started running and I ran and I ran and I ran until I couldn't run any faster. And then I threw that sled on the ground and I threw myself on top of that sled and I went down that hill. Block after block, and the wind was blowing through my hair, and I was flying. I really was flying because it had snowed about this much the day before. And you know how it melts at midday and then freezes again overnight, so there's a crust of ice on top of that snow, and I hit that ice and I flew through the air. I was thinking how much Pidge was going to enjoy this when it was her turn. And then I saw at the bottom of the hill, going to be very soon, where I was going to be very soon, was a wagon pulled by a horse, and I couldn't stop. I let out a yell. But the driver, he had his hat pulled in over his ears, and the horse had blinders on and wasn't paying attention to a thing. The only thing I thought I could do. I steered that sled as best I could, and I went right between the legs of that horse. That was cool. Well, my sister thought it was really cool. I looked back up the hill at her, and Pidge was up there waving at me. So I stood up and I went, ta-da! Just as long as I the whole thing. So, well, the really strange thing about that was that neither the horse nor the driver ever knew I was there. and you can imagine how fortuitous that was for me, because that meant that my grandmother did not come back either. So I like to say it was my first flight. Of course, it had nothing to do with airplanes. There is a family story that I saw my first airplane at the Iowa State Fair. I don't remember. It was on the ground, and airplanes at that time, you know, they looked much like chicken crates. You know, boards tied together with wire, and I wasn't interested in chicken crates. That was not unusual. Now, I didn't become interested in aviation until during the war. I was in college at the time. My school was near Philadelphia. Pidge, she was in school in Toronto, Ontario, in Canada. And my school let out for Christmas break earlier than hers, so I went up to Toronto to, you know, to spend some time with her, but also to see the city. And one morning, very early on, we were taking a walk. And you know how you're just walking down the sidewalk and you're walking and talking? And we saw coming toward us a rather awkward-looking group of people. And as they got closer, we saw that it was 4 men, and then they were all in uniform, and finally, that each of those men had only one leg. They were walking on crutches. That's why they were moving so strangely. And I watched as they walked toward us, and I watched as they walked past us, and I watched as they walked away. I will admit I was rude. I stared. Something was changing inside me. I knew, of course, that there was a war going on. I had been knitting hats and scarves and socks and sending them overseas with the Red Cross. All of my women friends had been doing that. We had been rolling bandages and sending those to Europe. The United States had not been in the war as long as Canada had. And we hadn't seen wounded soldiers on the streets. I thought I understood about war. One of the pleasures of growing up in my grandparents' home, well, grandfather was a judge, and he had a good many books. He had one room just full of books, and we were allowed to read anything in his library that we wanted to read, and a good many of those books, they were about war. They were all about glory and honor and valor, and when bombs burst, they burst in air. They didn't cut through. And I know it sounds stupid now, but when my friends went up to fight, I thought about it being an opportunity for them to prove themselves, to see the world. I didn't think about them coming back without a leg, an arm, a horse. And suddenly, everything else in my life was trivial. I couldn't go back to the Ovant school for girls where they were trying to make us into proper wives for wealthy husbands. I had to do something to help. And what I did was I stayed there in Toronto the rest of the war and volunteered as an aide in the military hospital. The sorts of things that all hospital aides do, and water pitchers for massage sore muscles. We worked 12-hour days, but in the middle of the afternoon we had a rather lengthy break. And my favorite thing to do during that break was to listen to the soldiers tell their stories. And the pilots had the best stories of all. Well, for one thing, they used the English language in a way I had never heard it used before. Words like dead, stick, landing, pancake as a verb. We pancaked? No, I asked so many questions. But finally, one of the fellows said he was going to be released, and he offered to take us out to an airfield. And I still remember that Sunday afternoon. It was snowing lightly, but there was a little red plane up there flying loops and spins. And when the pilot saw that there were some women down there, well, he proceeded to buzz us. And everyone else jumped back, but I just stood there. That plane, it spoke to me when it flew past. It was so close that the propeller drove the snow against my face, and it felt like ice, but it was just invigorating. I wanted to be in that plane. I wanted to be that pilot. I wanted it so badly. So I was during a war, and fuel was much too dear to be wasted on civilians. I had to wait until after the war. And, well, fortunately for me, my father, who had always lived in the Midwest, he had had some misfortunes and wanted to start life over again, and he thought Southern California would be a good place to do that. Now, a good many of the pilots who had made it back from the war, they were in California also because, they could fly almost any day, and there were air shows. I asked Father to find out for me how much it would cost to learn to fly, and he came back with the distressing news that it would be $1,000, which we did not have. But he did have $5, and he loaned me that $5 with, of course, the stipulation that I pay him back at my first opportunity. And with that $5, I could go up for my very first airplane ride. And it was even more wonderful than I had imagined. You know, and it's just you and the plane and all of that sky. And you're flying between bits of cloud and maybe right into an early moon. And everything down below, everything tall flattens out, and it all gets soft. Even the problems I had on the ground disappeared once I was up in the air because there was nothing I could do about them up there. That evening I told my family, I said, I think I'd like to learn to fly, knowing full well I would die if I didn't get to. Now, my father, of course, was skeptical because of the money, but I got my first wage-paying job and a second job, and different times I had 3 and 4 jobs. I was taken seriously, and I was not sure that the men would take me seriously, and of course have the right clothes so that I wouldn't stand out. I already had riding pants and I had field boots, but of course I had to have a long leather jacket and the helmet and the goggles, and I was every inch a pilot when I walked over that field. So imagine my surprise when I hear, "Hey fellas, we've got a dude pilot! Hey, we've got a dude pilot!" I had studied this so carefully and prepared so that exactly that would not happen. And I looked at them again, and I looked at me again, and it was my shiny new leather jacket. Because, of course, we were all working on our own planes at that time, and their jackets were filthy, oily, a little skip of a wind would come up and blow dust into that, and several weeks before my second lesson, but that just gave me time to sleep in my jacket every night to put some decent creases in it, and the day of my second lesson, I rubbed dirty oil into that jacket. And after that, they just said that I was a natural, and I had such a good time. You know, the easy part is being in the air. I mean, there's nothing more free than flying, but it's when you come back to the ground that is the difficult part, and the solo is the proudest moment of any pilot's life. My first solo landing was a little rough, but I had my license very soon. Mother and Pidge helped me buy my first airplane. We were at Bert Kinner's airfield, and Bert was working with the first airplane engines for planes. I liked his airster because it was small. I could feel it out myself. I didn't need any help. When I went to a flying, I could go flying. The other pilots did not like the airster because, well, it only had 3 cylinders. And in a radial engine, if you lose one of those cylinders, you don't have an engine. But I didn't have any problems I couldn't get myself out of. And it was just part of that freedom, being able to wheel it out by myself. It was yellow. Biplane, of course. A little yellow biplane. I called it my Kinner Canary. Flew it for several years, and then family problems. Mother and Pidge and I, we left California and moved to Massachusetts. I sold the Kinner and purchased a Kissel car, more practical for what we would be doing. And in Boston, I got a job that I thought I would still be doing today because it was so interesting. And up until that point, I thought that no one job could hold me for more than a short time. But I was working in a settlement house, helping people who were new to this country get settled in, and they were coming from Italy and Ireland and China and Syria. And I was put in charge of young people's activities. And this day that changed my life, I was working with a group of children on a play. Now, I don't know what your experience has been with plays, but mine had told me that 3 days before the play we would be in final rehearsals. And instead, those who had learned their lines had forgotten them. Those who had not learned their lines, of course, still did not know them. And the scenery, which I knew would be ready, the scenery remained to be seen. So I had to talk with the children, and I told them, I said, you know, we could do something else that's fun. We don't have to do this play. But they told me that they'd already told their families, and they told their friends, and they really, really, really wanted to do the play. So I said, all right, we have to work very hard, and that's what they were doing. They were working very chaotic, but still they were working hard. When one of my coworkers came in the door and told me that I had a phone call, well, I told her I was much too busy to take that call. She said that it was a Captain Rayleigh, and that Captain Rayleigh said he had to speak to me right away. So I told the children to keep working, and I took that call, and I was so glad I did, because Captain Rayleigh asked me if I would like to be the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. Can you imagine? I said, of course, of course. Now, he reminded me that quite a few people had died trying to fly across the Atlantic. And he said that I would have to be interviewed by a committee because they were looking for the right woman to represent all American women. Now, that first thing did not worry me, because we all have to go sometime, and I still cannot think of a better way to pop off. But that interview was a concern because I wanted this so badly. I wanted it, and I tried to picture the committee, the interview, and I thought, all right, what do I wear to the interview? How will I behave? How can I make them choose me? And of course, matters like that, my grandmother comes right back into my head, and she was saying, Amelia, wear your prettiest party dress, and be very sweet, and very demure, and they will love you. And I thought about it briefly, but I knew that the committee was going to be all men. And I thought, you know, if they like me too much, then they might not let me go because they might not want me to drown. On the other hand, if I was too much the 20th century woman, you know, if I was just too straightforward and too brusque, well, oh, thank you. I was afraid they might not even shake hands with me. Okay, heaven forbid I should wear trousers to the interview. But what I thought is, if I wear a simple dress, if I am polite, well, and it worked. It worked. They chose me to be the captain of this fine, big, tri-motor airplane. And I've been telling people ever since that I found out right away they had already hired a pilot and a co-pilot, both of them men. I still thought I would get to fly that plane, at least some of the time. But once we were up in the air, and it took some time to negotiate the weight of the fuel and being able to lift off in the weather, but once we were up in the air, I was really nothing more than a sack of potatoes on that flight, you know, for all the good I was. At one point, the cabin door flew open, and I had to reach out over that cold, gray Atlantic Ocean and pull the door shut and hold it until Slim came back and wired it for me. So I did make one contribution. I was sitting back there on a wooden box. You know, you take out the seats to make room for the extra fuel tanks. And I was keeping the log book, and I was under contract to write a book, and so I was looking out a great deal and taking notes. Oh, I did make one other contribution, but anyway, we've been flying for about 20 hours. And we thought we should be seeing land by then. Now, we were encouraged because we saw more and more boats beneath us, but we were flying like this, and most of those boats were on a perpendicular course like this. So we thought, well, maybe we'd gotten turned around somehow, you know, and we wanted to communicate with the captain of one of the ships down below, but we didn't have a radio that would do that. Now, I'm sitting there on the wooden box without a lot to do, and my eyes lit on a sack of oranges that someone had given us. Now, I had never thought about an orange being like a radio, but you use what you have, you know, and what we had were oranges. So I got a piece of paper and I wrote a note. Ship's captain, please display your coordinates on deck. We wanted them to write their latitude and longitude in really large numbers on the deck of the ship, and then fly over and, you know, we could read them and we would know where we were. So I took that note and I wrapped it around one of the oranges and I secured it with a piece of string, and then I opened that cabin door again, just a little bit,